Yeah.
To convene the fifth salute, the Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum, and we are indeed honored to have as our mistress of ceremony, Miss Dayna Eubanks, who is an anchor person for TV2. Miss Eubanks.
Thank you, General Theus. Good evening, everyone. I'm very honored to be here with such a wonderful organization as the Tuskegee Airmen, of whom we're all proud. Constantly we talk about them in the news now, and people reflect on all their accomplishments and what they did, and it's so important as we know that our children know our history and that we know our history and understand what contribution they made and they're still making, and that's what this is about tonight, a contribution that they're still making to our society. As many of you are aware, the Tuskegee Airmen was founded by Black United States Army Air Corps veterans and who trained and fought gallantly as a separate unit in World War II. They are continuing to contribute to our nation by inspiring and assisting American youth to achieve excellence in their educational and career pursuits. The Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum, toward whose maintenance the funds raised by this evening's event will go, is used to attract youth so they may be provided inspiration, counsel, advice, and assistance. And they tell me they are asking youth to aspire to excellence in whatever careers they may choose. You don't have to be a pilot. I would now like to introduce Reverend Joseph Brockington of St. Paul A.M.E. Church to present the invocation.
Heavenly Father, for this privilege to honor these men, these brave men, we thank you. We thank you for such men and women of our nation who dare to break barriers and bring your kingdom from heaven down here on earth. Make us always aware of the contribution they are making or have made to our country. Keep that fire burning in all of our hearts and bring us into an awareness of your love through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen.
And now for the posting of the colors. I will ask you to pause for just a moment. The posting of the colors directed by Master Sergeant Ferguson.
Please stand. Color guard. Post. Color.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we
be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Sergeant Ferguson. And at the podium, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but I was not, that Mary Blackford, whom you know as the Public Relations Director for Michigan Bell Telephone Company, also sings, and quite beautifully. Mary Blackford. And at this time, I would like to introduce to you the head table. To your left and my right, and I will ask each person to remain standing and for all applause to be held until all of our guests have been introduced, our honored guests. The Reverend Joseph Brockington, St. Paul A.M.E. Church. Master Sergeant Howard Ferguson, NCO Academy Graduate Association. Brigadier General David Ahrens, Commander of the 127th Tactical Fighter Wing, Southbridge Air National Guard Base, Michigan. Ms. Mary Blackford, our soloist, and Director of Public Relations for Detroit, Michigan Bell. Mr. Alfred Cole, President, Detroit Chapter, Tuskegee Airmen, Incorporated. Otis Smith, Esquire, past honoree. Mr. Felix J. Kirkpatrick, President of the Central Region of Tuskegee Airmen, Incorporated. Dr. Norman McRae, Director of Fine Arts and Social Studies, Detroit Board of Education, and Detroit Historical Commissioner. Mrs. Betty J. Allen, Deputy Director of the Detroit Historical Department. Mr. Robert Beatty, Vice President of Ross Roy Incorporated. He is representing Glenn Fortenberry, the President and CEO of Ross Roy, who was called out of town. Mr. Fortenberry is the Honorary Salute Chairman. And the Honorable Dennis Archer, Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. Our guest speaker, our keynote speaker, Mr. Carl T. Rowan, journalist and commentator. Major General Lucius Theus, U.S. Air Force retired, President of the U.S. Associates and Director of Civic Affairs, Allied Signal Automotive, and Salute General Chairman. The Honorable Coleman A. Young has not yet joined us. As you know, he's in the midst of something called a campaign. He will be joining us shortly. Dr. Elmore Kennedy, Director of the Detroit Engineering Department, Deputy Director of the Detroit Engineering Department for the City of Detroit, and Chairman of the Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum. The Honorable Judge Damon J. Keith, United States Court of Appeals for the 6th District. The Honorable Richard Austin, Secretary of State of Michigan. Ms. Priscilla White, author, President, Detroit Chapter, Tuskegee Airmen Auxiliary. Mr. Wardell Polk, Salute Co-Chairman. Father William T. Cunningham, Church of the Madonna, and Executive Director of Focus Hope. Ladies and gentlemen, and at this time, I would like to call to the podium Mr. Robert Beatty, who is here representing Glenn Fortenberry, the Salute Reception and Dinner Honorary Chairman.
There's a slight difference, Glenn's taller. As Ms. Eubanks said, Glenn was called on town unexpectedly. Often, as I'm sure you know, running a corporation the size of Ross Roy necessitates the chairman's physical being in one place, and his heart in another. That's the case this evening. Believe me, Glenn's heart is here with you. I can say a lot of things that I'm sure Glenn would want me to say, but let's suffice it to say we got his money, so what the hell.
Mr. Robert Beatty, Ross Roy, and now please enjoy your dinner.
Thank you, Ms. Eubanks. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my privilege and my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Board of Governors of the Tuskegee Airmen National Museum and on behalf of the Tuskegee Airmen, period. A word about the Tuskegee Airmen Museum. The history of the Tuskegee Airmen is well known, and as is the purpose of any museum, it is our purpose to perpetuate that history. But more importantly, it is our purpose to build on that history. And in that regard, the Tuskegee Airmen Museum in conjunction with the other arms of the Tuskegee Airmen National Organization, has embarked upon several programs to stimulate our youth and to encourage them to seek careers in aviation and airspace. Speaking of the museum, we talk about there it was at 20,000 feet at 200 miles an hour. You know, recently they launched Jupiter on its way to outer space at 200 miles a minute. So rather than become stuck in time, we are looking to fulfill our purpose in stimulating our young people and bringing to them the availability of careers that they may seek and follow in careers in aviation airspace. We're pleased that you could join us on this occasion, and we certainly appreciate your support. I'd like to mention to you that the proceeds from these banquets will go toward the furtherance of the programs and purposes of the Tuskegee Airmen Museum. And already we have phase 2 of the museum on the drawing board. And we hope to dedicate phase 2 of this museum in August of 1991, when the Detroit chapter will host the National Convention of the Tuskegee Airmen. And with your help, we'll be able to accomplish that. And more importantly, we are looking for a vintage aircraft that we will post, the type which we were privileged to fly in those days. We will put on display at this museum, and we're looking forward to your support in helping us to achieve this. Once again, our deep appreciation, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. Alfred Cole is the president of the Detroit chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, and he will bring greetings on behalf of the chapter.
Thank you, Ms. Eubanks. Would the Detroit chapter Tuskegee Airmen please stand? All Tuskegee Airmen, please stand. Remain standing, gentlemen. I'm not going to say it, attention, just relax. Honored dais guests, treasured friends and supporters of the Tuskegee Airmen, it is with great pleasure that we welcome you to our 5th annual I knew I'd get nervous. 5th annual reception and dinner of the Tuskegee Airmen's National Museum. We are happy that you are here celebrating this occasion with us tonight. We hope that you enjoy the evening, and we look forward to your continued association and participation with the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, Tuskegee Airmen, you can be seated. I would sort of like to recap on what Mr. Kennedy said. In one respect, he didn't even invite you to the museum. But the museum is located at the foot of Livernois, and it's open from May through Labor Day in September. We also take personal tours. The number, I would say, if you want to come through, you have to call Fort Wayne, and we will have someone out there to give you a personal tour of the museum. I would invite you to come and take a look at it. I'm very proud of it myself. Thank you very much.
General Theus reminded reminded me that that is the National Museum for the Tuskegee Airmen, not just local. It is the National Museum. It's located at historic Fort Wayne, so it's very special that that's here in Detroit. Felix Kirkpatrick is the president of the Central Region of the Tuskegee Airmen, and Mr. Kirkpatrick would like to bring greetings on behalf of the Tuskegee Airmen's Central Region, of course. And then he'll introduce Mr. White.
Honored guests, Mr. Rowan, members of the dais, good evening. I come here to bring you greetings from the Central Region, composed of 13 chapters. And I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that we have a contingent of Chicago members here tonight that motored up from the Windy City, and they're at table 49. Will they stand up for just a minute, please? We also have a representative of the Indianapolis chapter. He's at table 46, Lou Hill. Back in 1978, Richard Jennings came to Chicago to enlist the support of the Chicago chapter for this time it was a dream of having a national museum in Detroit, Michigan. 4 of us came up to Chicago so we could see what Richard was really talking about. And he took us out to, Fort Wayne. And here we saw a building that had been abandoned for 30, 40 years, perhaps. But Richard convinced us that this was going to happen to the building and that was going to happen to the building, and that he needed the support of the Chicago chapter. I'm pleased to announce the Chicago chapter did support him all the way, and now we have a national museum at Old Historic Fort Wayne, I think we call it. So we're glad to be a part of it. The Central Region will always support all of the TAI members, but we certainly have a warm spot in our heart for the Detroit chapter. Thank you.
And John Whitehead is the immediate past president of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. Mr. Whitehead. I'd like to call on Councilman Frank Ross of Highland Park to make a brief presentation to Justice Dayna Eubanks. We're missing 2 people, obviously. We'll return to that part of the program. And we're missing a 3rd person. Mayor Young has not yet made it to the dinner. He is still expected to arrive when he finishes his campaign swing this evening. And so, at this time, I'd like to call upon Judge Damon Keith, 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, for remarks on behalf of the city. A total surprise to him.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to bring greetings from Mayor Coleman Alexander Young on behalf of the city of Detroit. This is my hometown. I was born on the Hudson and Vinewood, as many of you know, and I love this great city of ours too. Dennis Archer, Justice Dennis Archer, our honoree to Carl Rowan, my friend of many years. Ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a rare treat if you have never heard Carl Rowan's speech. He calls it as it is. All you have to do is read his column in the Free Press and you know that. I did talk to Mayor Young today, and I expected him to be here because he has been breaking ground for new buildings every day this week. And, as you know, I don't know how he was able to squeeze them all into the 2 weeks before the election, but knowing now, but knowing Coleman Young, you know that he's a great politician and he loves his city, and no one can certainly replace him. But you know that Coleman is and was and will always be a Tuskegee Airman. He loves flying. He has his own private plane for the city. But we want you to understand his love of flying and his love of the city. And you know that if he were here, he would say congratulations to all of you, his friends, and remember to vote. And vote for Coleman Alexander Young. Continue to move Detroit forward. Thank you very much.
Even in his absence, Mayor Young got his point across. And now I'd like to call General Theus, who is here, to the podium to honor Justice Dennis Eubanks.
Thank you very much, Dayna, and good evening again to you, ladies and gentlemen. You have already heard what the Tuskegee Airmen are all about. You also know what the museum is all about. The idea of inspiring, aiding young Americans to achieve excellence in their educational and career pursuits. And toward this end, each year we work very hard to try to identify an outstanding individual, a role model to salute. This year, we did not have a problem with that at all, because after you hear about our honoree, you will see why it was easy for us to identify him as the person to receive our award this year. This year, it is our great honor and pleasure to salute Dennis W. Archer, Jr., Justice of the Supreme Court of the State of Michigan. I would like to tell you just a little bit about this great man, our honoree this evening. Justice Archer has an undergraduate degree from Western Michigan University, a law degree from the Detroit College of Law. His highly successful trial work made him one of the nation's most respected attorneys. He has served as president of the State Bar Association of Michigan, the National Bar Association, the Wolverine Bar Association, and not being satisfied with that, he wanted to pass on his knowledge and his sage advice, and so he took to teaching over at Wayne State University and the Detroit College of Law. Justice Archer was appointed to the Michigan Supreme Court in November of 1985, and since everyone was so pleased with that appointment, he was elected then to an 8-year term the following year. He thus became Michigan's first black Supreme Court justice in nearly 20 years, and only the second in Michigan's 150-year history. Justice Archer's innumerable outstanding contributions to the goal of equal justice for all, and his laudable leadership and achievements in his profession and in community endeavors, and his constant pursuit of excellence in all that he does, make him an ideal role model for youth and for all of us who are not necessarily so youthful. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the National Historical Museum of the Tuskegee Airmen proudly presents this Distinguished Achievement Award to this great jurist, great humanitarian, great American, Michigan Supreme Court Justice, Dennis W. Archer, Jr. Justice Archer, will you join me here? before we make the presentation, please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Before we make the presentation, I would like to call on a few of our Tuskegee Airmen to come here and join with me as we make this presentation. Wardell Pope, where are you? Come on over here. Dr. Elmore Kennedy, who's chairman of the museum. Come on over. We would like to ask Miss Priscilla White, president of the Tuskegee Airmen Auxiliary, to come over and join us. And then, thinking about it too, we must have the local chapter president, Mr. Alfred Cole, to please come up and stand with us. And last, of course, certainly but not least, we would like to call on the honorees of the past. We would like to call on Otis Smith, Esquire, to come up and please stand with us, and Judge Damon Keith to come here and stand with us. And now then, if Wardell Polk will show me the award that we have, we'll make the presentation. It's got to be a good one. Are we all gathered around as we should be? Again, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that we present this award to Justice Archer. I would like to take time to read it to you. And it reads, the Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum hereby salutes the Honorable Dennis W. Archer, Justice of the Supreme Court of the State of Michigan, for his exceptionally meritorious and pioneering contributions to the goal of equal justice for all, his exemplary leadership and achievements in the legal profession and community endeavors, thereby making him a superb role model for youth, and his overall excellence by proud presentation of its Distinguished Service Award. This is done in Detroit, of course, on today, October 26th, and is signed by Dr. Elmore Kennedy. You have met him before. Mr. Alfred E. Cole, who is president of our Detroit chapter, and Nancy Lieutenant Colin, our national president, and by myself. Again, it gives me great pleasure to present this award. Surely. Now, if he wishes to do this one, stay in close, ladies and gentlemen, and make sure that you can see the camera. All right, because this is being recorded for posterity. Thank you very much. And now then, I would like to turn the podium over to Justice Archer. Archer.
Thank you, Major General, distinguished head table, members and friends of the Tuskegee Airmen and the Auxiliary. And to the past honorees, Judge Damon Keith and Ted Talbert, our own mayor, the city of Detroit, Coleman Young, and Otis Smith, my predecessor on the Michigan Supreme Court. I think some of you may know of my involvement in the American Bar Association, where I've been working with corporations, many here in Michigan, to promote equal opportunity for minority lawyers to compete in providing legal services to corporate America and to governmental agencies. Through the ABA Commission on Opportunities for Minorities in the Profession, which I chair, we grew from 6 corporations in May of 1988 to 39 in May of this year, and from 39 to 62 corporations as of today. One entity, for example, is FDIC, which will spend over $200 million in legal fees in this fiscal year. Our goal is to have 100 corporations in our program by May of 1990 and 200 by May of 1991. I cannot begin to tell you what this has already meant in pure dollars and cents for our minority lawyers, whether in minority-owned law firms or minority lawyers in majority-owned law firms. It has been mind-boggling how this program has dramatically increased the professional standing of minority lawyers. Of more importance to me is minority students in law school, minority students in undergraduate school, and yes, in our time of need to be able to look at our minority students in grade school and in high school, to be able to look them in the eye and to honestly say to them that if you get a good education, if you mind your mom and dad, and if you're willing to work for it, if you choose law as a profession, you will be only limited by your potential. This program of which I speak is not an affirmative action program, nor is it a set-aside program. Rather, it is a program based solely upon one's ability to deliver quality legal services in a cost-effective manner. I can look at these grade school and junior high school and high school students in the eye and tell them if they get the good grades in high school and in college and then in law school, their salary upon graduating, depending upon where they will work, will be anywhere from $18,000 to $87,000 a year. Ladies and gentlemen, this program is vitally important to the very well-being of our country, the United States of America. If we are in the legal profession do not give true meaning to the words equal opportunity, who then will we depend upon? Some would say not the executive branch of the federal government. Some would say not even the United States Supreme Court after their last term as it relates to their decision in the civil rights cases. But don't count out the legal profession. There are many who in time of despair rise to the occasion to be real leaders for equal opportunity. There are those of you who are by now, I'm sure, saying to yourselves, well, all of that is fine, but what, if anything, does that have to do with the Tuskegee Airmen? It quite frankly has everything to do with the Tuskegee Airmen and the black civilian or military men and women who provided exemplary support. With all due respect to those who fail to appreciate history, long before our very own Rosa Parks, who lives in Detroit, sat down, and before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. began his efforts to set us free, there were the Tuskegee Airmen who merely asked for an equal opportunity to compete and to serve our country. They in effect said that if you will give us an equal opportunity to compete, we don't need any special treatment, and you see that they did not, as we do today. We have benefited. They did not have, as we do today, the benefit of Dr. Martin Luther King-led civil rights movement, nor do they have the opportunity at that time to use phrases like affirmative action or set aside to use in their argument. They made a principal case for the right to fly and yes to die for our country. The effort by those who helped to bring about what is known today as the Tuskegee Airmen and the rich legacy that they have richly earned created for others like myself a dream, an idea, a reason to have hope in the darkest of times, a reason to believe that a program that has worked for these great men with modification could create opportunities in the legal profession. They brought about equal opportunity in the armed services. Many who preceded them, who came after them, made a career in the armed services. A number have gone on to college on the GI Bill. Today, I submit, given his education, his background, and training, that the Tuskegee Airmen can take full credit for our pride that we all feel in the elevation of General Colin Powell to the head of the Joint Chief of Staff. In sum, I've tried to share with all of you what the Tuskegee Airmen's leadership and their trailblazing has meant to me. Now, if you will permit me to acknowledge my mother and father-in-law, James and Eleanor Duncan, if you wouldn't mind standing, please. I would like to say on behalf of my wife, Judge Trudy Duncan-Martin, who is sitting down here before us, Judge of the Circuit Court. She rightfully chairs any award that I receive, but I want you to know how honored I am to receive this Distinguished Achievement Award from the Tuskegee Airmen and from the outstanding women who support you. Men who I respect so highly, men who at great sacrifice gave so much of themselves for the betterment of all of us, and men who had such broad shoulders that they found room for me to stand on. You have my solemn promise that I will always try to uphold the high standards you have set and that you've always met. Thank you very much.
And now you see, ladies and gentlemen, why we did not have any problem whatsoever in selecting this great man as our honoree. for this year. Justice Dennis Archer, absolutely superb role model for all of us. Let's just wrap it up by giving him one more big round of applause. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to another one of the highlights of this evening's program. I am indeed honored to have the pleasure of presenting to you our keynote speaker this evening, Carl T. Rowan. Many of his firsts, and he's had many of them, and I'll just name a few. They include being among the first 15 blacks to be commissioned in the U.S. Navy, the first American black to sit with the President's cabinet and with the U.S. National Security Council, and the only journalist ever to win the coveted Sigma Delta Chi medallion in 3 successive years of reporting. He has served as Director of the United States Information Agency, as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, and as a member of the U.S. delegation to the United Nations. Mr. Rowan is a permanent panelist on Agronsky and Company, a frequent panelist on Meet the Press, a producer of the authoritative Rowan Report. His many awards include the prestigious George Foster Peabody Award, Journalist of the Year from Washington Capitol Press Club, Ebony Magazine's American Black Achievement Award, Sigma Delta Chi Medallion, and the Distinguished Achievement Award of the University of Minnesota, among many others. His formal education includes a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Oberlin and a master's degree in journalism from the University of Minnesota. And so now I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to please join me in welcoming to the podium the renowned, award-winning, highly respected, syndicated columnist and commentator whose superb journalism has done and is still continuing to do much to improve equal opportunity and the quality of life for not only the Tuskegee Airmen, but for all American citizens in general, and the disadvantaged throughout the world. So, Mr. Carl T. Rowan, please come to the podium.
General Theus, Judge Keith, Justice Archer, Ms. Eubanks, my other friends. You know, I sat there, I always watch the audience during the introduction, and I thought I saw a couple of people out there nodding as though you were telling them more about me than they wanted to know. But I want you to know I thought it was just right. Because these days I need all the help I can get. Because what I'm seeing in my mail does not necessarily resemble the kind words you said, General. I got a letter the other day from a woman in Newark saying, I was lying on my sick bed and I picked up the Star-Ledger and began to read your column. And I got sicker and sicker. And just 2 days ago, I got a letter from a guy, San Mateo, California, saying, I read that piece in Reader's Digest where you said, let's get tough with drug users. Now, goddammit, when I finish my day's work, I'm tired and I want to come home and smoke me a joint, and you're trying to take it away from me, and I hope you die of a drug overdose. So I come out to do these speeches in the certainty that at least there somebody will say something nice about me. Although I tried to get out of this one. When Bob Beatty and the people at Kmart called and said, would you come and do this speech? I said, hell no, I'm not coming back to Detroit, because every time I come to Detroit, I get stuck giving a speech, and the mayor is out reasserting his virility. If I didn't read the birth announcement. Now, I mentioned Coleman Young, really, with a seriousness of purpose. He's the mayor of a great city. Philadelphia has a black mayor. Los Angeles is a black mayor. In fact, all over the landscape these days. Black third-ranking man in the House of Representatives. Powerful other black members of Congress. Black people asserting political power that you never would have dreamed could exist. When these flyers were facing all kinds of insults and humiliations and degradations trying to fight for their country. And I come with one very simple message tonight. And that is that nothing in this society changes by accident or happenstance. Somebody has to get out there and sacrifice and take some chances in order to make things change. I mentioned the politicians. Let me tell you about a few people who made things change. Some of whom you may never have heard of. There was a preacher in Belzoni, Mississippi, 1955, when I went down on one of my early assignments as a young journalist at the Minneapolis Tribune. Reverend Lee, Gus Coates, and Professor Griff Bird were leading a campaign to register some blacks to vote. They went in, and the registrar had a lot of questions about how many windows in the courthouse building, how many bubbles in a bar of soap. But these guys wouldn't give up. So on his way home that night in '55, Reverend Lee was shot dead from a passing car. Gus Coates and Griff Bird still wouldn't give up. So they went back to the courthouse and tried to register. And as they were pushed out and walked away, a man stabbed Professor Bird. And when the police came, the guy said, "I was just sitting there trimming my nails when this nigger walked into my knife." And he got away with it. Well, Gus Coates owned a little store. Suddenly, not a drummer in Mississippi would sell him anything for his store. But Gus Coates persisted, and in fact, he went miles away and loaded a little truck up with some groceries that he got from a guy who hadn't been intimidated by the White Citizens Council, and he brought it back to his store. And on this night, 55, somebody walked into the store and fired a gun. And as Gus Coates related it to me, I looked down, and oh my God, my stomach was a-bleeding. And I said, "Mr. Coates, Reverend Lee had been killed. Griff Bird had been stabbed. And you still went back and tried to register to vote. Why did you do this?" And he had his shirt up so I could see the bandage on his wound. he smiled a little bit and said, "Young man, you wouldn't understand. I just wanted to be able to say that I voted once before I died." Gus Coates, Reverend Lee, Griff Bird, who shamed America and the conscience of the Congress into a position where in 1965 Lyndon Johnson would go before a joint session of the House and Senate, ask for a Voting Rights Act, and use words that you wouldn't have thought a president would use in those times. "We shall overcome." And he pushed through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this profoundly changed America, because not only did a lot of people vote in Mississippi and Alabama and some places where they hadn't been able to vote before, but a lot of blacks in the North began to vote. And a lot of white people in Los Angeles and Atlanta and a lot of other places began to vote on the basis of something other than race. And that's why we now have 7,000 plus black elected officials in this country. Individuals changing America. And that's what these Tuskegee Flyers did. You know, I have wished General Theus hadn't mentioned my days in the Navy, because I was going to try to pretend that I'm a hell of a lot younger than these Tuskegee Flyers. But I've got to admit to you that I'm old enough to remember the milieu in which they began the Tuskegee experiment. You know, once as a young reporter, Eleanor Roosevelt asked me to go with her to Hyde Park for a picnic, an afternoon at Hyde Park. I stayed 13 days. And during those days, we'd sit out on the porch at night with the frogs croaking on the lily pads of the pond nearby. And she'd tell me stories, including stories about how she pressured FDR to move faster to achieve desegregation, particularly in the military. And she said Franklin would always tell me that we were going to have a war, and we had to build up for that war. And he needed the votes of the Southern senators in order to carry out his build-up. And he could not do anything that would jeopardize that Southern support. And she said, he'd tell me, now you go on out and say what you want to say and do what you want to do, because everybody knows I can't control you anyhow. But I can't be a part of this. So we had a situation where the Air Force didn't want any Negroes, as we were then. The Marine Corps absolutely didn't want any. Black American youngsters had almost no opportunity to learn to fly, no role models to speak of, whereas white kids were seeing pictures like Seeing Zero and Test Pilot, and we had Smiling Jack and the comic strips, and Captain Midnight, and Charles Lindbergh and Eddie Rickenbacker. But blacks, nowhere. So these people, patriots in a country that didn't want any black patriots, said, we want to learn to fly and fight for our country. So what they threw was supposed to be a crumb of starting this experiment at Tuskegee. And some very interesting things are recorded. I hope all of you have read Bernard Nolte's book, Strength for the Fight, because he has a marvelous chapter about the Black Eagles. And he talks about how these men were in the Air Force, and they weren't in the Air Force. They could land at Maxwell Field, but they couldn't eat there. And they couldn't spend the night there because of Jim Crow. And the farmers in that Alabama area, they looked and said, hell, our niggers down here don't even drive tractors and cars. Why would a nigger want to fly anyhow? And this is recorded true history of what went on. But these people, Judge Bill Hasty and others, Truman Gibson, were fighting for an end to segregation. But they couldn't get any help from the White House, and they couldn't get any help from the top military leaders. Let me just read you what General George C. Marshall said in response to one of these attacks on Jim Crow. Marshall warned first that the War Department cannot ignore social relationships between Negroes and whites that have been established by the American people through custom and habit. Second, that either through lack of educational opportunities or other causes, the level of intelligence and occupational skill of the Negro population is considerably below that of the white. Third, that the Army will attain its maximum strength only if its personnel is properly placed in accordance with the capabilities of individuals. And fourth, that experiments within the Army in the solution of social problems are fraught with danger to efficiency, discipline, and morale. And they were not going to have any part of letting these Tuskegee Flyers become a part of the overall Army Air Corps and so forth. But these Flyers persisted. They learned to fly. And then Marshall and the others had a big decision to make. What the hell do we do with these black guys who suddenly are flying airplanes? And they cooked up a deal to send them to Liberia to act as a coastal patrol. Liberians balked and said, oh no, they come here and you're going to want some more land, you're going to want some concessions for us. And then fate took over. The Allies invaded North Africa. And General Rommel's forces were kicking the living hell out of the Allied forces. And the United States needed tactical air support in the worst way. And General Spatz and some others said, okay, send us some of them colored flyers. So these guys go in, and let me tell you, the deck was still stacked against them. They put 35 pilots in a white unit, and they put 26 in a black unit. And in the Sicilian campaign, the shorter manned black units were getting tired. And there was a request for a 3-day set down, a 3-day rest. And they wrote a terrible report saying that, well, there was a Colonel William Mummite